Hi there everyone, this is Dr. Lynch, a professor of English at Rockland Community College, and I'm making this video for my English 104 class as you work on your Othello assignment. And this assignment involves you finding a scholarly article about the play Othello, and then you're going to analyze that scholarly article. In particular, you're going to look at two of its sources in your analysis. So the first stage is to actually find an article, and I'm here in the MyRCC page. I'm going to go down to Academics and click on the library. You can also click on the library here from MyRCC using this little icon, whichever way you want to do it. That's going to launch the library page. And as we've discussed, the best way to find an article about Othello is to skip this search bar for now. We'll actually come back to it and go to databases A through Z right here. And then I suggest starting with the database called JStor. Now, JStor, if you scroll down and you're looking for the letter J, JSTOR, so we're going to scroll all the way down here, and we see JStor. It's an archival journal collection of arts and sciences and language and literature. And what does that mean? Well, JStor aggregates journals published that are essentially contain articles published on the humanities, on literature, some social sciences, and so each of those journals has a different name and it has a different focus, and it's filled with articles. And what we're looking for are scholarly peer-reviewed articles in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. JStor is a great place to go for this. So we're going to click on JStor, and that's going to launch JStor's search functionality. Now, when we're searching in JStor, we want to, put in a bunch of terms that we think will help us get good results, and we can add a search box at any point. So, for example, we could type Othello, and then let's say that we also want to type Shakespeare because there are many different versions of Othello, including films and other adaptations. So we want Shakespeare there. Let's say that we've been a little bit intrigued by the homosexual or homoerotic kind of connotations that happen in Othello, particularly around Iago and Cassio, Cassio and Othello. There's some really interesting sort of nuances there, and maybe we've picked up on that and we're intrigued. So let's type in homosexuality, okay? And then we want to stop there. We're going to just let this be our search, okay? We're also going to click on articles and books, and then I'll hit Submit Advanced Search. And when I do that, I've got 602 results, which is a lot, and I'm going to, sort of scroll through and look at them. Iago's alter ego, race as projection in Othello, that's fascinating. That is going to combine race in with this idea of Othello and Iago as being alter egos, right? Different forms of each other. There's another essay that taps into racism here. There's Shakespeare, cultural materialism, feminism, and Marxist humanism. There's quite a lot of isms in that title. If you're interested in those isms, you may find that article fascinating. And then this is the article I was, in fact, aiming to find. I do have a goal in mind for this video. Slander, Renaissance Discourses of Sodomy, and Othello. And this article is by Robert Matz. It was published in the journal ELH. It's in volume 66, number 2, in the summer of 1999. So it's fairly recent. I understand this is before most of you were born, but it's still fairly recent. So I'm going to click on this article, and when I do that, I'm going to just find the article will open right in front of me, okay? Now, usually the way to figure out whether you want to use an article is to read the introduction, the first 2 or 3 page paragraphs, and then you can also see, maybe if you read further and you're looking at topic sentences of paragraphs, see if the article is interesting to you. You can read it here when you are clicking forward using these arrow buttons. Okay, so you want to kind of skim the article. Some articles will have what's called an abstract or a summary. That can be really useful to you. And once you've found an article that you want to work with, then of course you're going to read the article really thoroughly. One thing that I recommend is that as you read the article, if you're pretty convinced this is your article that you want to work with, that you want to make the centerpiece of this assignment, you're going to write down a sentence or two about each paragraph and what is that paragraph saying. If you do that, you're well on your way to writing a summary of the entire article, which is a really important part of this assignment. Now, you may be asking, I learned how to summarize when I was a little kid. Then I was told later in my education that I shouldn't summarize. Why are you telling me now in college to summarize? The thing to remember about any act of writing is that you always have to think about your audience. The reason you're often told not to summarize in, let's say, high school, or even in this class, right? You were told, for example, I told you, don't summarize the creation myths that we read earlier in the semester when you're writing about them. The reason I told you not to summarize those texts is because your entire audience, and in my class, you're always writing to every single person in our class. That audience has read those creation stories, right? They don't need a summary. It's actually not important for them to have a summary because they've read the text. But for this assignment, you're still writing to every person in our class, and those people have read Othello, but they have not read your article. So summarizing your article, which may take 1 to 3 pages of your essay, is going to be really important. Okay? So as you dig in and you start working with this article, one of the key things you can do is write a sentence or two that corresponds to each paragraph. Now, I'm actually going to present the article to you now. Okay, this is the article. I downloaded it. There's that little download button we saw in JStor. It's on my computer now, and I can go ahead and I can, read it. Sorry, this is not actually the article we mean. I apologize. I'm jumping ahead of myself. So here's our article: Slander, Renaissance Discourses of Sodomy, and Othello. Now, what I want to do is let's pretend I've read the article and I have taken notes, I've jotted down summary of each paragraph, and I'm ready to start looking at this person's sources. Well, first of all, I need to find where the sources are, and depending on your article, the sources could be at the bottom in the footnotes of each page. The sources could also be at the end, in an endnotes kind of section. And in fact, in this article, the footnotes are at the end, so we call them endnotes. And you'll see that they begin here on page 13 in a section called Notes. And the footnotes here, the notes that are in the endnotes, they correspond to notes that appear in the paper. So the first time the author uses a note, number 1, is referring to number 1 in the endnotes. And so you kind of have to go back and forth and back and forth. And you can download this article if you want and make it easier for you to kind of search through it. That's fine. You can also read it here in the library website, whatever you prefer. Okay? Now remember that your essay assignment asks you to look at 2 of the sources that this author cites, 2 of the sources that Robert Matz, our author of this article, cites. And I've already done some of this work for us, but I just want to show you how to find those sources. First of all, you're going to look at which sources are cited in the endnotes. So for example, what we see in endnote number 1 is that the text of Othello that's being used in this paper is the Riverside Shakespeare's edition of Othello. Okay, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do anything with that information. We are not going to be using Othello as one of our 2 scholarly sources. You want to be on the lookout for other scholarly sources that this scholarly source has used, right? This source is a peer-reviewed scholarly article, and it is going to rely on other peer-reviewed scholarly articles and books. We're looking for those. So the first one of those that we come across is actually in endnote number 2, Michel Foucault's History of Sexuality, Volume 1, which is a very famous book written by a French theorist, Michel Foucault. And you'll see here that the book was published in 1976, and it was translated by Robert Hurley in an edition of 1980, okay? And we could actually try to go find that book. We could try to find it in RCC's library. We could try to find it in the SUNY library catalog. We have a lot of options. But let's keep going. Let's look at the next page of notes, okay? Here in note number 3, what you learn here is that a lot of times academics put entire conversations in their footnotes and endnotes. And sometimes they're referring to sources that they don't actually use. So in this case, our author, Matt, is referring to a discussion of the issue, and we'd have to go back to early in the essay to see what number 3 is noted, right? So what's the issue that's being discussed? And then you'll see a whole bunch of sources cited here. Now, what this means is he's directing your attention to a scholarly conversation that's happening in these articles. He's not necessarily citing these articles. What we're looking for is an article that he cites. And I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit to show you number 5, because number 5 is what we're going to look at. Number 5 is a citation from Alan Bray's article titled Homosexuality and the Signs of Male Friendship in Elizabethan England. It was published in 1990 in a journal called the History Workshop Journal. Okay? And he's also going to give you page numbers. In this footnote, cites pages 2 and pages 3 through 8. Okay? So if we find Alan Bray's article, and, preview, we're going to find it. If we find Alan Bray's article, we know exactly where to look, and that's going to correspond to note number 5 early on in the essay. So this is actually a pretty good option for us. We're now going to try to find Alan Bray's source. And when we find it, we're going to look at page 2 and pages 3 to 8 to see how our author, Matz, uses Bray's article in his essay, in his paper. Okay? Now you're also going to see that Bray is cited multiple times here. Cited, and the abbreviation is friendship. Okay, it comes from Signs of Male Friendship in Elizabethan England. So friendship, page 4. Friendship, pages 8 to 15. Turns out this guy, Robert Matz, uses Bray quite a lot. Okay, so that's an important source, and that also gives us an inclination that we should be on the lookout for this source. How do we find it? Well, first of all, we know everything about it. We know the author, the title of the article, the name of the journal, the year it was published. That's a lot of good information. Let's go back to the library website, okay? At this point, I'm actually going to go back to JStor, and I'm going to do a new search. I'm going to click up here for advanced search, and I'm going to type in Bray. I'm going to select author, because we know Bray is the author of this article. I'm then going to take a look at the title. So the title started with the word homosexuality, okay? And I want that in the title. And then I'm going to click on articles, because I know this is an article. Now I'm going to hit submit, okay? And I come up with 2 results. One of them is exactly the one I want, Homosexuality and the Signs of Male Friendship. That article was cited in my source, in the source by Matz. So I'm going to download this PDF, and spoiler alert, I've already downloaded it, and then I'm going to take a look at it, okay? And when I do that, and here's where I'm actually going to switch, when I do that, I see this article by Alan Bray, and I've got, all the page numbers, as they existed in the source. And now I can actually look at the specific parts that Matz cited. So I would read parts of this article. I would probably start with the beginning, and I would look especially on pages 2 and pages 3 through 8, which are going to have some interesting information that Matz used in his article. Okay? And when I am in the process of analyzing Matz's article, I'm going to talk about how Matz used Bray's work. And I can do one of a few things, right? I can, agree with the way that Matz used Bray's work. I can point out that Matz neglected a certain part of Bray's work. Let's say that Matz, we think, misinterpreted Bray or left something out of what Bray said that was important, right? Matz may have left it out in his analysis. Okay, so how the author that you chose works with his or her sources is really important. That's part of the analysis that's going into this essay. Okay, so this is a large part of what you're doing in this assignment. You are summarizing a scholarly article on Othello. You're then going to analyze that article. Specifically, you're going to analyze how the article uses 2 of its sources. You're going to find those sources. You're going to read all or part of these sources, and then you're going to talk about how, in this case, Matz used Bray. And then we'll also talk about another source that Matz used.